Economics at Stanford University. His research focuses on working from home, management practices, and economic uncertainty. Besides being a prolific author, Nick is widely known for having developed and made available survey data on these topics, including the World Management Survey, the Economic Policy Uncertainty Index, as well as the World Uncertainty Index. He's an English citizen and previously worked at the UK Treasury. Nick will talk to us about key decisions around working from home, and he will draw for his talk on his extensive research record on the topic of working from home, as well as on his professional experience working with governments and the private sector alike on developing management practices in the post-COVID world. The format of today's webinar is as follows. We will stop 5 minutes before the hour because Nick has an important family commitment. Therefore, Nick will give a presentation of about 30 minutes, followed by Q&A. I have the pleasure of collecting your questions via the chat function. Nick, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Luke. Yep, so I'll go ahead and I'll share. This is the time where, you hope this works. Okay. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about the future and the impact of working from home. As Luke said, I'll talk for about 30 minutes and then I'll go to Q&A. So weirdly enough, I've been working from home for almost 20 years. It wasn't honestly a major, in fact, it wasn't even really a minor research topic. It was something that I'd written 3-4 papers on over the years, strung out. As Luke mentioned, I've been working on management practices, and back in 2004, we collected some data on work from home around a randomized control trial in 2010 and done some policy work. Obviously that all changed in March 2020. And from March 2020 onwards, I've been doing a lot of work, probably more than half my time is spent on this. And I'm going to talk today based on, we've been running a bunch of surveys, one in the US that's 5,000 people a month, one in the UK, that's a labor force, there's some firm surveys, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of organizations and companies. A lot of firms, but a lot of not-for-profits as well. I mean, like the NSF, NASA, the National Institute of Health, UN World Food Programme, etc., etc. So I'll give you some facts on working from home and then some implications for management and then some implications for the economy. So first thing is working from home is sticking. I guess nobody needs any convincing of this. Like inequality, there's actually various different ways to measure working from home. My favorite measure is the share of full paid days work from home. And the reason I think this is in some ways the best measure is it affects commuting. And secondly, it affects office space. So I know a lot of people work from home in the mornings and evenings. We're not looking at that. We're looking at a full day. And you can see before the pandemic that, full paid days work from home were about 5%. It jumped, it exploded. This is US data, by the way, but it's going to look very similar in Northern Europe. I have UK, German, French data. Northern Europe is slightly lower, the levels, but the trends are very, very similar. So it exploded during the pandemic as folks shifted to work from home. Basically, anyone that could work from home did at the beginning of the pandemic. And then it's fallen back over time. We're now at about 40% of days. So most days now in the US and European economies are in person. Post-pandemic, we predict it will be something like 25 to 30%. So each month we've asked 5,000 people, what are you currently doing? What has your employer told you you're going to do post-pandemic? And then we reweighted that to match the labor force of people aged 20 to 64. So it's worth thinking that, bearing in mind, the labor force is in 3 groups. There's about half of people, a bit over half, that can't work from home at all. So these are typically the lowest paid folks in the labor force. They're like frontline employees in manufacturing, retail, like if you think in the ECB or in Stanford, for example, like security, catering, cleaning, facilities, when you go out and buy stuff in shops, people that work in retail. So that's just over half. There's a second group, there's probably everyone listening, me, you, probably pretty much everyone on the webinar, that is hybrid. So this is professionals and managers. And for professionals and managers, it seems to be close to universally moved to a system of like 3 days in the office, 2 at home, or 2 in the office, 3 at home. I'll come on to that in a minute. That's kind of tricky to manage. I'm going to focus much of my time on hybrid. And to mention, while it's 30% of the labor force, it's about 50% of payroll, because these folks are much higher paid. And so maybe as a share of GDP, it's maybe close to half. And then finally, there's a group of about 15% of people that are going to work from home full time. These are people that kind of aren't managing others. Typically, they aren't that creative, but they often have quite technical roles. So IT support, payroll, some HR folks, some high-end coders. You probably noticed Airbnb has sent its entire firm home. Quora sent everyone home. Upwork. There's a bunch of tech firms, but mostly this isn't kind of high-end coders. This is mostly people doing, say, payroll or call centers or things like that. So why is hybrid for folks like us, managers, professionals, become so dominant? Well, hybrid, in theory, if it's well organized, now I'll come on to this, is seen as combining the best benefits of home and the office. So I use the example of Apple's plan, and happy to come back this in the Q&A, because Apple's plan seemed like the great plan in 2021. This year in 2022, it's not so clear, but anyway. So Apple's plan is you work from home Wednesday, Friday, you come into the office Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. And the Apple plan says when you're in the office, those 3 days in the office, you have very social days. It's lots of meetings, presentations, training, lunches, dinners, anything that's best done face-to-face is pushed into those 3 days. Take your old pre-pandemic week and you think, what tasks are better face-to-face? Let's move all of those tasks into the 3 days I'm in the office, and everyone's in on the same 3 days. And the upside of that is the evidence is face-to-face is better for creativity. There's some, increasing evidence coming out on this, and it's probably better for building culture. And then the upside is for the other 2 days, the Wednesday and Friday, you get to work from home. So the upside of this is it's quiet. So working from home is much quieter than the office. It's easy to get distracted in the office. Typically, studies have shown people are 4 or 5% more efficient when they work from home. And secondly, most importantly, it saves on commute. And on the commute, here's some data on it. So the average person in Northern Europe, in the US, saves about 70 minutes a day when they work from home. So we typically commute about 35 minutes each way. And the question is, where does that go? Well, as an employer, about 40% of it, which is 30 minutes, goes into extra work. So this is the reason why employers really like it. If you have somebody working from home, they're probably working about 30 minutes more a day for you. So that's obviously a huge increase in performance in terms of kind of output. But employees like it because the rest of the time, the majority, the remaining 60% they get. So you get more leisure, more activities, more childcare, more time to do chores. So maybe not surprisingly, given that work from home on those 2 days allows you to work more quietly, saves on time, allows you to work more minutes, people report small positive productivity impacts of work from home. I wouldn't say these numbers are huge, but they're certainly not negative. So the big fear pre-pandemic is you'd allow people to work from home and they'd shirk off, they'd not work, they'd fall asleep. There's a joke about the 3 big enemies of work from home as the bed, the television, and the fridge, and the fear is people will just not work. That turns out that's just not true. In fact, as we know from the macro data and from firm level data, performance has actually been pretty good post-pandemic. And this is survey data. I have some randomized control data. I'm not going to overload you with data, but the summary is productivity is probably slightly up for people when they're working from home. So that's one big benefit. And in fact, it's been increasing over time. So here's numbers showing estimated productivity going back to the beginning of the pandemic, and it's rising. And the reason it's rising is initially in March 2020, we struggled to think about how to make work from home work. We're thrown at home, people don't have equipment, we don't have processes and systems. As time's gone on, we've got better and better at working from home. And so, this productivity impact is positive and it appears to be rising. So one benefit of work from home is productivity looks like it's probably up. The other one, I'd say the biggest one, is it keeps employees happy when you talk to firms, that's their main objective. They're like, we're facing, the great resignation, quit rates are high, labor markets are tight, particularly in the US. Work from home is a way to keep, it improves productivity and it keeps employees happy. So, why wouldn't we do this? And this is some numbers from survey data whereby we ask people, how do you feel about hybrid, the option to work from home hybrid versus coming in the office 5 days a week? So basically, what's the value of being able to work from home 2-3 days a week? Is it negative, 0, positive? And most people say positive, or some say 0, a few say negative. We ask them to give numbers as a share of salary, and here's the average value. So it looks like people value the ability to work from home 2-3 days a week. As equivalent across the entire economy is about an 8% pay increase. For the ECB, for tech, finance, business services, it looks a bit higher. The reason is folks like us tend to be slightly higher paid, have better, home environments, have slightly nicer houses, larger home offices, etc. So it's actually quite appealing. So to be clear, work from home improves productivity, also keeps employees happy. This is data just out really from a randomized control trial I've been doing in China, where we took a company, Trip.com, it's one of the world's largest travel agents, and they have 1,612 engineers, marketing and finance professionals, so graduates, and they randomized them by even or odd birthdays into whether they work from home 2 days a week or came into the office full time. And you notice that folks that work from home 2 days a week, their quit rates are about 1/3 lower. So this is pretty strong causal evidence. People like working from home at least 2-3 days a week. And so if you offer it to them, quit rates are down, work satisfaction's up, there's lots of positive stuff. And, the reasons you can see why people like working from home, we ask people, what are up to 3 benefits? Number 1 is no commute. Maybe it's not surprising to anyone that's listening. Number 2 is the flexible work schedule. So something that's coming out over the last couple of years is a second benefit of work from home is the flexibility in the days you'll work from home. So think about it. If you need to go to the doctor, go to the dentist, maybe go out for a run, pick your children up from school, play tennis, play golf, kind of leisure activities. These are or work activities in the sense of medical activities. These are often easier to do actually on weekdays. So if you're working from home on Wednesday, it's typically easier to see the dentist than on Saturday. So what we see in the data is on days people work from home, they work slightly less hours, but they make up for it in other days on the weekend. Their productivity is actually up, and they get the flexibility of being able to use this time more efficiently. So flexibility is the second big deal. The third big benefit is, less time getting ready. In the data, I have a slide. I'll share these slides, by the way, at the end, but in the backup slide, I'm not going to show you unless there's time. It's clear that people don't spend as long getting ready when they work from home as they go into work. The average person reports it takes them half an hour to get ready when they leave the house versus 20 minutes when they work from home. And then finally, the third benefit that we hear is it's useful for supporting diversity. So there's a number of studies coming out. One on the left is ours. The one on the right here is from Slack Future Forum, big US tech firm. So the way this seems to work is every demographic, every group likes to work from home. But people who are a minority in their workplace, which means less than 10% of their co-workers are the same race, gender, religion, politics, or age bracket, have a slightly higher preference to work from home. So I take myself as an example. I'll be 50 next year. If I was in a workplace where almost everyone else was in their 20s, I don't find it, probably as positive. I know they'll be talking about TikTok. I don't know. I'm so much older than people like that. It's hard to know what they talk about. They may not connect that well with me, just because we're 30 years apart in age. The same, apparently, you see it in the survey data. People report the same feelings that they're slightly less positive when coming in, either a minority in religion or politics or race or gender, etc. So the idea is, it's not that these folks don't want to come into the workplace. They just would like to work from home a bit more, like to spend slightly less time in the office. And so the implication of that is, if you get very tough, you do say a Goldman Sachs, and you say, look, you've got to come in 5 days a week, you're likely to see higher quit rates of people that are minorities. So it's hard to be very pro-diversity and force everyone in 5 days a week. You know, these two are not very mutually supportive. So not surprisingly, given all the benefits, I mean, there isn't any, to be honest, there isn't any obvious downside. You know, as I've gone through it, the benefits are productivity looks slightly higher. Employees are dramatically happier, probably kind of equivalent to about an 8% pay increase. It appears to support diversity a bit. And the final thing I haven't talked about is it probably saves office space. So there's 4 upsides. There's not obviously any downside. Again, I'm happy to talk about in the Q&A. And again, to be clear, this is not fully remote. This is hybrid. So this is typically coming in maybe 2 or 3 days a week. That policy is completely taken over and has become dominant across US employers. So, you know, across Europe, across Northern Europe and the UK. I was talking to a lot of folks in Australia actually late last night, similar thing. So here is a map, a graph of the average days working from home per week post-pandemic, what employers have told them. So each month you've asked people, how many days is your employer planning for you to work from home post-pandemic? And we've mapped it out. And you can see at the beginning of the pandemic, most people were saying, look, my employers told me they're going to come back full time, or maybe they're going to give me 1 at most 2 days a week working from home. And as the pandemic has gone on month by month by month, this figure has just gone up and up and up. And so now it's very standard for me to talk to companies to say we're thinking of either a 3-2 or 2-3. So typically 2 or 3 days a week in the office, 2 or 3 days a week at home. In fact, you know, I've been talking to a lot of real estate companies. I was talking to one yesterday for a while that owns large office buildings. And, you know, we may at this point be close to the post-pandemic norm. I was back in the UK for a couple of weeks. And, you know, the UK, you go there, central London, the tube is packed, people are back, shops are open. The UK, this is US data, like the US. You know, this data here, just to explain this. This is looking at share of people in America that are going to NBA games, that's basketball games, TSA checkpoints, that's basically going through the airport security, open table diners, that's people eating out. Almost all of that is within 90 to 95% of the pre-pandemic norm. So people are close to the pre-pandemic levels of travel, of going to games, of eating out, not totally there, but getting close. You look down here and you can see in terms of office use, Castle Barometer, they use swipe cards. And they tell you how much people are swiping in and out of offices. You notice that office use is only 40%. So it looks like we're probably going to asymptote out at about 50% of office use, with the concept that people are going to be coming in 2-3 days a week, while at the same time getting to probably 100% of pre-pandemic level. So the big challenge of working from home, the big challenge of working from home is that how do you choose how many days and which day? So, you know, by this point, you know, certainly summer 2022, I'm talking to hundreds of firms. They're saying, look, we're on board with hybrid. The question is how to organize it. Whoops. So the hard thing to deal with is this figure. This is like the nightmare figure for managers. So you ask people, would you like to choose your own work from home days? And 70% of people say yes. I mean, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't like to choose, you know, week by week, which days they come in? Very appealing. You know, it gives you flexibility. If there's something going on at home or you have an issue with your spouse, you know, he or she's working on different days, you can flex around it. The problem is 76% of people say would actually also like to coordinate to be at work on the same day that our co-workers are there. And the reason is most people come into work because they really like to see their colleagues or work with their colleagues. They don't come into work for, you know, the equipment or the bagels or, you know, the ping pong table or whatever else it is. So this presents a clear dilemma. How do people both choose their days and come in on the same days as their co-workers? And the answer is they can't really. You can't really do both. So there's kind of a paradox that people want to have their cake and eat it. The question is, which should dominate? Should people be allowed to choose their days but have them coming in on different days, or should everyone come in on the same days? And early on, I was in favor of choice, in part because of figures like this. So we asked people, how often would you like to have paid work days at home? And what you see is around a quarter of people never want to have a paid work day. They never want to work from home. 23%, they're young singles or older empty nesters. They get lonely, they get isolated, they want to come in full time. At the other extreme, there's 32% of people that love working from home. they tend to be, you know, middle-aged folks with young kids in a house. They're like, you know, I like working from home. I see my spouse, my kids, my friends. I actually never want to come back into the office again, or hardly ever. And then the rest of people, about half of people, which probably include me, or somewhere in between. I kind of like going to the office. I like seeing my colleagues, but I also like having 2-3 days a week at home. So given this variation, you'd think, why not let people choose? There's an incredible spread. I've been nervous about choice, and increasingly so actually over the last year or so, and I'll explain why. So the big problem with choice is when you talk to people, now there are firms, you know, the ECB, but many US firms, many European firms that are going back to the office. What you hear is when you let people choose their days, you hear people complaining about it's like low energy. I come in, I spend much of the day on Zoom. Why am I coming into the office to spend all day Zooming in on calls? Or people at home are joining meetings. So here are 2 photos of what's called mixed mode meetings, where some folks are at home and some in the office. These are photos put out by companies that sell hardware and software for this. They look great on photos. They're quite problematic in practice, at least, you know, currently. In future, maybe in 3-4 years, the technology will get better. But when you talk to people, the folks at home are saying, look, I join these meetings and people in the office, there's one camera in the room. And quite often there's someone turning sideways, or I'm looking at the back of somebody's head, or there's like, you know, there's whispering going on, or people did, you know, they're like, the people joining from home are saying, I sometimes feel like I'm not in the meeting. I can see things going on. I see people laughing, and, you know, but I don't know what's happening. And then the people in the office are saying, why did I come into the office to be on Zoom calls with some of my colleagues that work from home that day? So it's kind of tricky for teams to have some people in on some days and some on others. And the reason is the key benefits when you ask people why you want to come in the office is to be with colleagues. So people don't come into the office to use the equipment for the, you know, whatever else, the bagels. And Google, apparently, in order to get people back, decided to use Lizzo, you know, the pop star, to give a concert. They're trying to get Justin Bieber. I mean, it's like people don't, I mean, sure, if you can put in Justin Bieber and Katy Perry and Taylor Swift day after day, people will come into the office. But, you know, apart from that, in practice, for just about any employer, it really is an issue of getting people in because they want to see their co-workers, they want to socialize with them, they want to work with them face to face. So given this, most large firms, most large US firms are either having teams or the company decide, you know, get together and decide which days they work from home. So you can imagine a team of 20 people, they're saying, look, we as a team are going to come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That's our norm. That's what we've decided. Or sometimes the whole, which is what like Google's doing. Google's saying each product or each area you should decide, but you should try and come in on the same days. That's the red bit here. Or Apple, which is the blue bit here, is the whole company saying, you know, Apple is saying you're going to come in on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and you're going to work from home Wednesday, Friday. Generally, if I was going to give advice, I would allow people to work from home on Mondays, Fridays. That's what everyone wants to do. If I was to have days in the office, 2, maybe, it depends whether it's 2 or 3 days, but it would be some choice between Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So as, you know, broad advice, I would generally, at least for the next 6 months, I mean, things are going to change. This is enormously uncertain. Things are changing at high speed, but at least for the rest of this year, a kind of simple plan might be to get teams to come in on the same 2 or 3 days every week. That's kind of what academics do. We come in for seminars and teaching days, and everyone in the, you know, the labor group or the macro group comes in on the same days because that's when the bag lunches and seminars are. So we come in on the same 2 or 3 days each week. So everyone's there. We have all our in-person meetings, events, trainings, lunches on those days. Everything that can be done remotely, individual work or cross-office things or Zooming or anything, we try and do on the 2 or 3 home days a week. And then for people that are new hires, potentially have an extra day in the office. Long ago, I worked in McKinsey. We had a setup for the first year. Our intake, there was 20 people in my intake. We used to come in on Fridays. Friday mornings would have like just our group would have trainings. So it's kind of about promoting hybrid, but being deliberate about it, deliberately saying, look, we want to come in on the same days. We're going to structure it to achieve that. So I'm going to go through quickly some implications for the office and for cities. This is slightly more economics and real estate. Then I'll stop and take questions. So first, on size. So you might think offices are going to shrink dramatically. you know, is the ECB going to get rid of half of that tower, sublease it? The answer, I don't know, actually. Shouldn't talk about the ECB, but I'll talk about firms in general. So on the left is US data, on the right is UK data. Firms are not planning to cut office space that much. So we've surveyed 450 firms in the US, around 3,000 in the UK. The US is with the Atlanta Fed, the UK is joint with the Bank of England. So these are big surveys. And firms are planning to cut space a bit, but not, you know, nowhere near the 40-50% footfall reduction we're seeing. So to be clear, the typical office is going 2-3-3-2 hybrid. So it's about 50% of the time people are now going to be working from home versus, you know, 5-10% pre-pandemic. So there's a huge reduction in footfall, probably 40%, but the cut in space is 5%, way less. So then the question is why? And there are three reasons when you talk to companies. One is that they say it's hard on scheduling. Like, you know, if we're going to come in on the same days, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, we can't cut space. You can't sublease an office on Monday, Friday. And in fact, no one really wants offices on Friday, much like you can't sublease offices on Saturdays and Sundays. So it turns out to get people in on the same days, or even if you let individuals choose, they tend to choose to come in the middle of the week, it's actually very hard to reduce space through scheduling. Secondly, firms saying, look, it's complex. It's like hard enough managing hybrid. But companies are saying this is so complicated. Like we have home days and office days and different HRs. It's just saying I can't deal with that and dealing with space. So let's get people back to the office. Let's get that up and running. And maybe 2023, we'll think about space. And then finally, there are continuing real fears over density. So people are not comfortable, you know, some people certainly are not as comfortable as our pre-pandemic density. So we've been asking this question on the top left. Be interesting for everyone to think what they would answer. So the question is, once the COVID-19 pandemic has ended, which of the following would best fit your views on social distancing? And it goes from complete return to pre-COVID activities all the way down to no return to pre-COVID activities at all. I would continue to social distance. You notice at the top right, almost a half of people are complete return. That'd probably be me. You know, 30% are substantial. I don't know, some of you complete and substantial. Then there's partial, and there's 12%, 13% that are no return. It turns out that group of people that are no return or partial return is pretty large and pretty stable. They're 10 to 15% that no return have been stable for the last 2 years. That generates a real issue for companies in terms of, it's not so much office space, but it's in kitchens, elevators, entranceways, toilets. If you're really uncomfortable with being close to someone, you can't have offices at full capacity. The elevators are a big issue. How do you get people up and down? So this is the third challenge, particularly for for the ECB building, for example. How do you get back to full capacity? It's tough because in the mornings, a lot of people can't go up the elevators. In the evenings, a lot of people go down. I think longer run, this may change. So this is, a slide on directed technical change, basically. So on the left is we've been scraping new patent applications from the US Patent and Trademark Office. So each week they put out a couple of thousand new patent applications, and we scrape the text to see the share of them that mention remote work, working from home, telework, etc. You see, before the pandemic, it's about 0.5%. Once the pandemic started, it starts rising and rising and rising. So, not surprising. This is like economics 101. If the market for work from home technologies has gone up 5x roughly, which it has, we've gone from 5% of people working from home, 5% of days, to about 25 post-pandemic. Companies are just pouring much more money in terms of R&D into better hardware and software. So, I've been working from home for 20 years. 20 years ago, it was horrible. It was like phoning up on the telephone, emailing files. It was really not great. It was not very easy. What we're using now, WebEx, Zoom, all of this stuff's got a lot better it's really come about in the last 5-10 years. And the other thing that's pretty critical is the cloud. Everyone's file sharing documents using Dropbox, etc. Those are hugely important innovations that made work from home easier. I don't know what the future is going to be. Better audio visual, better virtual reality, holograms. It's hard to know, but whatever it is, the rate of technical progress is going to pick up. So 5, certainly 10 years, remote work is going to be far better. So I think it's going to be easier to reduce space, to do all kinds of impressive things. Right now, it's not so easy. Second fact I mean, I'm interested. No, this is happening in Frankfurt, but people have been leaving city centers across much of Europe. This is true for large cities. So on the left is New York. On the right is San Francisco. We have data from the US Postal Service, change of address. So in each zip code, each month, we know the net flow. The story is pretty robust across US cities. I've seen this for London, the same thing, which is people are leaving the city centers, moving out to the suburbs. And the stories you hear are people say, look, if I'm going to work from home 2-3 days a week, I don't really need to come into the office full time. I can, I'm only going to commute 2-3 days. So I'm happy to move further out and put up with a longer commute in return for much more space, back garden, maybe a home office. And in fact, it looks like big cities maybe are going to lose 5 to 10% of their population over the long run. This is a flow of population graph. What you see is in the city centers and the high density just around that, a lot of people left early in the pandemic, and we've yet to see that flow reverse. So if you cumulate, this is a flow. So if you kind of integrate over this, they're down about 5 to 10%. I don't think everyone's going to come back. I think we're permanently going to see less people living in city centers. Rents are going to be a bit lower. In fact, we see this. So this is data from Zillow for the US. On the left is rents. On the right is home values. What you see is for city centers, rents are kind of back to trend. There was a huge drop. Rents were way down in places like San Francisco. San Francisco, they're down about 20-30% at the peak of the pandemic. No one wanted to live in the center of town. They're back to trend, but they're way up in the suburbs. Same with home value. So what's happened is the housing market in general has done very well because obviously interest rates are extremely low, but it's particularly done well in the suburbs. People have moved out of city centers. They've moved out to the suburbs. And, that's reflected in both movement of individuals and property prices. So the question is for offices, are they moving? There's a lot of talk early on. People like WeWork, in fact, I remember us at an event with the head of WeWork Germany about hub and spoke, moving out to the suburbs with offices. It turns out that's not really happening. So when you talk to firms, they say, look, under hybrid, we want people coming in 2-3 days a week. They want them in on the same place. So we want to keep a city center office, or maybe if you're a campus, a nice campus, we want people come into some of this nice, they feel attracted to come into. It's easy. If everyone's living around the edge of the city, you can't have 5 different little offices. It makes no point. Why would you go into a little office to Zoom someone else in another little office? You'd stay at home. So most firms are saying they're keeping their current offices, they're keeping them in the city centers. They're generally focusing on making sure these are nice and making sure they work for hybrid. So employees come in 2-3 days a week. The big change I do here is on design. So companies are tending to put in more meeting rooms, more lounges, more open plan seating. The idea is or lounge seating in particular, when you come into the office, you now, for 2-3 days, it's more social, it's more working together. So there's a focus on more meeting rooms, more, this kind of Zoom room thing. If people are going to take Zoom calls, try and do it in somewhere that isn't noisy. And then lounge seating area. Maybe I'm between meetings, I want to sit out there. If someone, I'm sitting out there and Luke wants to come talk to me, sees me, he comes and says hi on my, my in the office days. The other thing is pretty obviously air filtration, cleaning, more safety systems. Finally, there's an impact on city centers. So on the left is the share of people's person days in city centers versus pre-pandemic. So in San Francisco, New York, big American cities, you see about, almost a half of the reduction, almost 50% reduction of person days in city centers because office workers are working from home. On the right, this is what it translates into reduction in spending. Early on in the pandemic, we asked people, how much do you spend at work each day on food and drink, on average on entertainment, on retail, and we added up across the year. And the average American office worker spends about $15,000 a year around the offices. It's probably similar for Frankfurt, London. I mean, it's a lot of money. If people are working from home roughly half the week, that is a huge reduction in expenditure in city centers. So permanently, city centers, sandwich shops, bars, shops are going to see less trade. The big impact, I think, as an economist, is it's going to reduce the value of their rent. So, the supply of retail space is the fixed factor here. So basically, if you own retail property in city centers, you've done very badly. That's permanently worth less. City centers will be a bit less busy. It may even be good. I mean, it depends on your view, whether you'd rather acquire a city center. Finally, I think long run work from home will increase outsourcing and offshoring. I did an interview for the Financial Times about, 6 months ago now, and mentioned this. This is the thing they led with as kind of the interesting point. Bottom right, there's just a piece I put in from earlier this week from the Wall Street Journal. Basically, what a lot of companies are saying is, we've discovered remote work works well. People are quite efficient teleworking. Whole teams have been teleworking for up to 2 years. We're now thinking, do those teams need to be, located in our area, in our country? They can maybe be abroad. Maybe we could outsource them. So it's hard to offshore now. It's not so easy to outsource now because the pandemic has still have some travel restrictions. But I think much like when China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, there was a huge increase in globalization of manufacturing. I think the pandemic is going to lead to a big increase in globalization of service trade, and we're going to see it through a spike in outsourcing and offshore. So I'll stop. Working from home is here to stay. There are some pretty broad implications for management. There are, I think, pretty big implications for cities and economies. I think it's a huge shock to the economy in many ways. I mean, one of the most obvious is people moving out of city centers out to the suburbs, changes in company structure. If I was going to talk about policy, then my biggest concern, I think, is for cities, actually, for tax revenues, and particularly, living out in San Francisco subway systems. As Luke mentioned, I have to leave 5 minutes early to drop my daughter at the train station. But the train she takes to school every day, the cow train, ridership's down 50%. They're now losing huge amounts of money. And there's a discussion as to whether it's shut down. It's true for the New York subway. I mean, this stuff is worrying. So I will stop here and go to Q&A, but I'll end on that.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Nick. So the questions are coming in. Actually, maybe for your benefit at the ECB, for the time being, we have decided that workers have to come 2 days a week. So not 3, not 5. It's 2 days a week, but it's flexible. So it's completely flexible. It's up to the employees, up to staff, and one consideration at the ECB is that indeed also a large fraction of employees is still very concerned about COVID. You also spoke about that, and indeed getting this to work in a way that everyone respecting the 2 meter distance and everyone at the same time in the building is more than a nightmare, even if it was desired by staff. So that's sort of the background. So one question related to this is about monthly versus weekly cycles. So the question is, what about having a coordinated on-site days 1 week per month and free choice on-site days the remaining 3 weeks? So sort of now you are arguing for fixed days, but at the ECB we have this flexible days. What are the sort of the pros and cons on how to organize that?
Great. So I don't want to take too strong a line because, to be honest, everyone's very uncertain. I think the next 6 months is going to be a lot of experimentation. There are at least 2 other versions, by the way. So you can have 1 week a month. Mostly that's not been that popular. And the reason is it's kind of hard to schedule with kids and childcare and with spouses. It's not impossible, but it's you could do that. You could have 1 week of nightmare commuting in if you live 2 hours away. Generally, when I talk to companies, they say, look, most employees don't want it because their spouse is off and they're kind of coordinating on childcare. The other issue is typically activities that are face-to-face often can't wait up to 3 weeks. So the reason it generally has been seen as you try and have maybe 2 days a week in person is you only want to come in when it makes sense. So there's no point coming in just to be on Zoom or do email all day. That's obviously pointless. So the only reason to come in for 2 days a week is for face-to-face events, big meetings, presentations, trainings. That stuff can wait. It's typically not urgent. It doesn't need to be that day. But often, you don't probably want to wait up to 3 weeks. So that's the reason generally that, 1 week a month hasn't been the dominant strategy. The reason, I should say, for firms that are fully remote, if you look at companies like Airbnb, Quora, Upwork, Automatic, I've spoken to all of these companies and they all say, look, even though we're fully remote, we still have people meet up typically once every other month for like a week. So it's hard to find companies that are fully remote. They never meet each other in person. And, you know, I've spoken to the CEOs. Like I spoke to Adam D'Angelo, who's the founder and CEO of Quora. He said people need personal connection. You want to, I mean, it doesn't need to be every day. And in their case, they decided to go fully remote during the pandemic, but they're still going to come in once every other month. In terms of choice versus norms, I don't know how it operates in the ground. I suspect if you have teams that work together, they probably decide to come in on the same days. The ECB, it sounds like it's not mandating choice, you know, not mandating certain days. For example, for economists, if you're in the macro group, you're likely, you know, in Stanford, because the macro seminars on Monday and the labor seminars on Wednesday, we naturally come in on the same day. So, you know, there's a choice about how heavy-handed and how much you norm it. Generally, Mondays and Fridays, people don't come into work. So it means that you naturally, if you're coming in 2 days a week, you're pretty likely to overlap on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Wednesdays, etc. But yeah, coming in 2 days a week is very standard. I'd say that is certainly in the public sector is pretty much the norm now as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. So the two questions on all the survey data that you presented, which I understand are from different countries, even though most of the charts you presented were, I guess, US and UK. But so one question is about how stable people's preferences are over time. So in this micro data, do you see some effect there? For instance, you know, the first day after long absence may be perceived as better than the average day in the long run. And the other question is, relative to what you just presented, showed many charts based on the US and the UK. I mean, are there any differences for Europe that sort of jump out?
Yeah, so in fact, I realized I probably should do it. So I have, let's see if I can pull this out. Here we go. So I can quickly screen share actually let's see, here we go. I have some, you can see this. So this is data. We've been collecting it across, this is only a few slides, but this is data for the group, including Mateus, who's at the EFO. So across countries. So it's a global panel. The reason I didn't go through this, I probably should have included it, but there's only 2 waves right now. We're running it. We had one in July 2021 and one in February. We're going to do one later this year. The basic message from this data is working from home is a global phenomenon. So I've focused a lot on the US, Germany. Germany's here, looks pretty similar. Northern Europe looks pretty similar. Asia's a bit lower. You know, there's some, actually had a discussion with Google China earlier in the week. Asia's slightly low, but not massively. If you look at people's desires, in America, people want to work from home 2 days a week. In Germany, it's 1.6. These things aren't completely comparable. There, I would say it's very similar. I mean, I wouldn't read too much into the differences. The stylized factors across every country looks like these are OECD countries. You know, but work from home is here. It's here to stay. People want to work from home. Employers are planning, but less than people want. Perceptions have improved. Everyone's dramatically more positive. They feel they're more productive. So here are productivity numbers. They're all positive. And, you know, they're surprised by how good it is. So I'll stop sharing now, but I don't think anything I've said, I know I've focused on the US, but the results seem very similar for Germany. Work from home is here to stay. People like it. Employers like it. I mean, if there's one positive thing from the pandemic, one silver lining in what's been a horrible 2 years, I think it's been our realization that work from home is a good thing and that we should be doing it, you know, 2, 3, 4 days a week.
Thanks, Nick. That's clear. So, and on the sort of time dimension, when you look at sort of the different installments of your survey, do you see some shift in preferences?
Sorry. Yeah, so you're a bit. You know, there's 2 shifts. One is what people like. So we ask individuals what you would like, and then we ask them what your employer has given you. In terms of what people would like, it went up a bit at the beginning, and then it's gone sideways. So for the first 6 months, people, you know, back in March, April, May 2020, I mean, it's a pretty weird environment, as everyone remembers. We were thrown home. It was scary. I mean, you know, everyone was truly, really, really scared about this unknown disease. We didn't know the mortality rates of COVID. There was no vaccine, etc. And for the first year, work from home preferences went up, I think, as people got used to it. It's then moved sideways. Employers look very different. So employers initially were relatively low. They weren't telling their employees much. And they were typically not saying you're going to stick. And then by the beginning of 2021, employers month by month are becoming more and more positive on work from home. That's just a relentless upward trend. So there was kind of this big gap between what people wanted and what their firms were telling them early on. That gap has closed a lot. So go back to kind of May 2020, people wanted kind of 2 days, 2.5 days a week. Employers were giving them one. So there's an enormous gap. There's almost threefold difference. By now it's shrunk to employers are saying 2.5, people are wanting 2.6, 2.7. So the gap has shrunk dramatically. So in that sense, that's very positive. But I mean, partly that's driven by tight, this is US data, the gap may be larger in Germany. The US data is partly driven by tight labor markets. So in America, I talked to firm after firm, they're like, we have to offer work from home. I spoke to a recruiter and she said, in tech, if you're not offering work from home, forget it. Just forget it. No one's going to take my call. You have to be offering at least 3 days. Otherwise, there's no hope. Like, you know, or maybe paying 20, 25% more. I mean, like, it's like danger money or something. Yeah, so we've seen it. And I think part of the drift upwards for employers is they realize it works. And partly it does work better now. Like WebEx that we're using has got better. There's a bunch of new features. You know, I've got a nice microphone and a video camera. I'm sure everyone else, we're so used to this now. So that's also, you know, my desk, if I, you know, it's a minor thing, this desk goes up and down. I won't show. I prefer to stand, but I mean, this was something it took a few months to get, but people now are just much better, much more comfortable at it.
Thanks, Nick. So about office locations and choices that the firms have to make. Do you see any differences between small and large firms? So we like to think of the ECB as a large firm with, you know, high quality office parks and the like. Are there any sort of different implications related to firm size?
Not, I mean, the big implications, in some ways, the big thing is that what has not happened. So I don't know if you remember, everyone was saying big offices would go, firms would go to hub and spoke, they go virtual. We haven't seen that. So I assume the ECB's, you know, you have a beautiful office there and there's the towers, like, you know, most companies like that are keeping their offices. People are coming in less. You know, it's interesting. A lot of managers are saying I'm under real pressure to reduce space, but it's not easy because everyone wants to come in. You know, everyone's coming in the same 2 or 3 days. So typically there's not much happening in offices. It's not a very exciting area. In the long run, I think office space will reduce. So office prices are soft. So this is a price versus quantity adjustment. So the quantity of office space being used is not down much. You know, it's like a lot of the ECB is probably a good example. You're still keeping your offices, but they're empty in the sense they're probably half the fill rate of pre-pandemic. That's very standard. What we also see is the prices of offices, the value of leases is down because people see in the longer run, 2023, 24, 25 onwards, firms are going to reduce space. So looking ahead, they're saying they're going to reduce space, but it's complicated. To do it, what you need to do is you need to have scheduling. You need to say, right, each person, who do you want to work with when you come in? Which days do you want to come in? What facilities do you want? And then some big algorithm figures out and gives you days and you schedule. And, you know, you guys come in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you guys come in Wednesday, Thursday, etc. That's complicated to do. No organizations are doing that right now. And so we're not actually seeing much in the office market.
So a central theme that you've developed is that one of the reasons to spend time in the office is connections, you know, interactions, aside from the culture aspect. And so there are a bunch of questions about wanting you to push that a bit more, clarifying what kind of interactions are we really talking about. So you know,
sure.
What can you say about that?
Sure. So I would say, you know, there are researchers out there that you have a randomized control trial or server, you know, data in mind. This is definitely a great area to work on. I'll tell you the two best, you know, there are 3 data points, 2 studies and an anecdote. So start with anecdote. I must have talked to 400 or 500 managers by now. Now, this isn't strong data, but they all get the sense that it is valuable to come in 1-2 days a week. Just personally, for research seminars, I think they're better in person. Teaching is way better in person. I teach undergrads and grads. It's definitely better in person. It's very hard to hold people's attention. So I'm not claiming everything is better in person, but some activities are. In terms of the research, There are two papers, one in Nature that just came out and one in Nature Human Behavior. So starting with the first one, the Nature paper, they basically ran experiments where it's artificial experiments. They got teams of people to come up with new ideas for products. They also did it in a company. They randomized some engineers. They randomized between meeting on Zoom versus meeting in person in a meeting. And then they evaluated independently the quality of the ideas. And they found they're significantly better when people met in person. So not a huge gap. It wasn't like they didn't innovate over Zoom. They did. They just found it was slightly higher quality. The Nature Behavior paper uses Microsoft data and looks at email traffic and messaging. It shows that for remote teams, you tend to message more within your team, but you tend to make less connections to new people. So they call it siloing. So what happens is, their interpretation is when you're in the office, you're having meetings, you're meeting people in the canteen, you're randomly bumping into other people, you make new connections. At home, that doesn't happen. You can communicate a lot with your current team, but less with other people. So this evidence isn't super strong. And certainly when I spoke to Adam D'Angelo at Quora, he said, look, we're going to go fully remote. I'm not sure how much it matters. I have a view it probably isn't as good, but I don't think it's that big a deal. I save a lot of space and I keep a lot of employees happy. So I think it's an open question, actually. My safe bet when having worked on uncertainty, I'd say uncertainty is very high. You don't want to make decisions that are costly to reverse. I would probably, to be risk averse, do exactly as ECB is doing, have folks come in 2 days a week and evaluate, at Christmas, decide what makes sense. It may be that for some people, fully remote is better. It may be for other people coming in more days, but I'll kind of take a cautious data-driven approach to it.
Okay, and then there's a question about whether to have sort of a universal approach or also attempt to cater to individual preferences or needs, for instance, health concerns.
Right.
So what's sort of a good approach there?
Yeah, I mean, you can also have some degree of flexibility. Another plan is like 2-2-1. Imagine you have a team that there's 1-1-4 or something. So you typically want anchor days. So you do want days. So again, just because it's my world, I talk about, for me, but for a day when there's a research seminar, it makes sense that everyone comes in. We tend to have our bag lunch and the seminar. It's all on the same day. So that kind of sets a lower bar. And we don't have Zoom in the seminars anymore. People just have to come in and it is in person. You can argue with that, but right now, maybe that would change in 23, 24, but currently we're just not well equipped. The Zoom doesn't really work very well for height. It's just not a good experience. So you could then say, look, should people come in an extra or a third day? That's more debatable. I think it depends on the task. I don't think there's a necessarily fixed rule. In the short run, I'm totally on board with saying 2 days a week. In the longer run, when we collect data, we'll have a better sense and say, look, for some activities, at the extreme, security, janitorial, food service, these people need to come in 5 days a week. Now, it's possible some of that can be done remotely. Someone was telling me in San Diego, they have these robots that go around the streets. They're controlled by a human and they're cleaning the streets. Who would have thought street cleaning can be done remotely? Maybe it's a gimmick, but all of these tasks, it's probably worth taking a data-based approach. Another example is across the road. I'm looking at our house right now. My neighbor's a doctor. She said pre-pandemic, I never did telework. It was unheard of. Now I do it 2 days a week because it works. And a lot of my patients want it. They find it easier to contact me over Zoom. So things are changing. I would say in the short run, do something safe like the ECB is doing. Christmas, spring next year, reassess, collect data, survey people. The other thing, as I mentioned, technology is changing a lot. So the technology of 2022 is a lot worse than it's going to be in 24, 25. And so, 2-3 years for sure, we're going to, certainly 5-10 years, it's going to be way better. Like Star Wars holograms. It sounds like ridiculous in movies, but this is going to be here in 5 to 10 years. That a lot of companies are working on that very, very real time.
So I'm mindful of time. I don't want your daughter to miss the train.
Last question
then. What's the environmental impact of W of H?
It's a great question, and I'd say it's not clear. So again, it would be fantastic for someone to do a study on this. So on the one hand, it seems like it should be good because we're commuting less. So that's obviously a positive. Of course, as an economist, there's a behavioral response that people are moving further out. So we're commuting less, but on average, we're commuting further. So that's a negative. Also, if we move further out, we're in larger buildings. And if there's more construction out in the suburbs, they're bigger buildings, there's more environmental damage, that's a negative. There's another debate, and it depends on actually what part of the country where you are, as to, of course, we're now at home during the day, so we're having heating, and in the summer, air conditioning if you're in hot America in the summer, versus that at work. For a lot of places, actually, it's more efficiently done to heat and have air conditioning in the office than it is at home. So I would say it's very but then that's another negative probably. But then business travel is down by about 30%, and that's extremely bad, jet fuel. So I would say it's unknown. There are actually quite large, big positives and negatives. And again, it's an area it'd be useful for policy. My guess is in the very long run, it should be positive because eventually reduce transport. But as economists, there's behavior responses. And if congestion is less and you come in less, you maybe drive further. And, so I think it's a fascinating question. I care a lot of, like everyone, climate change is hugely important. But it's not obvious right now what the net effect will be.
Yeah. Okay, more research needed. Great.
Exactly.
Great. So this was terrific. Thanks so much for being with us. I know it's very early day in the day for you there. And thanks for doing this. It was great to see you.
Yeah, look, thanks for it. It's very nice of you to listen to me for an hour. It's great. I appreciate it. And thanks for the great questions.
Thanks. Bye now.
supporting them so they can stay and deliver is more important than ever. We must also ensure creative, multifaceted, and flexible solutions that combine low and high-tech methods to reach all children and minimize disruptions to their learning. In mid-March, over 15,000 schools resumed education in Ukraine, mostly through remote learning.